award, which she's saying is not quite young alumni yet.
Old
but,
enough.
Yeah, old enough, yeah. But we're very excited to have her here with many accolades from Ohio Wesleyan and other awards for her writings. We're excited for her to share some poems with us. So I don't think I need to go into a full history. Like I said, many of you know her, and we're excited to have her here with us. So,
Thanks, Kelly.
I'd like to hear a full.
Actually, it's funny that Brindle's going to come and give you a full introduction.
Just a few words.
Success was foreshadowed.
They read that today. They said that.
They actually did read that.
She received her MFA in poetry, did that?
Yeah.
I have to say the funniest part of I can say that the funniest part of the award ceremony is that I joined a sorority for 1 year and deactivated, and now it's in my citation that I was a member of a sorority.
Yeah.
that was something I did, and then I took it back.
But now it's
Yeah,
apparently
no, you
like
got
you
it.
can't
It
take it
follows
back.
you.
Yeah.
It
You
follows you.
can't take it back.
First thing you didn't want to, that's true, things
Ice cream.
you don't
It is
want
hard.
to
Hey, Marty.
It'll be on my tombstone, I'm sure.
I once went.
Just another reason to be
grateful.
I'll talk to Marty.
Thank you guys all for coming during what is actually a break in the weather. So my plan, because I can do what I want, is to run short. Because it's sunny, a lot of us have been sitting inside for the last couple of hours, which was lovely. But I think while we have a break in the weather, it might be nice to get out and enjoy it a little. And this is a poetry reading, so I can read as many poems as I like. Yes, Bob.
I have not been doing any of that and sitting at home waiting for this.
So I will read as long as you are interested. And the rest of you can just trail out until it's just Bob Flanagan and
I
I.
had assumed that I was going to rush out to be home in 10 minutes.
Well, we can enjoy the weather outside. Okay. So being asked to do this was such a joy for me. It's really surreal. I'm sure everyone says this. It's the point of cliche. Are you eating ice cream?
Yes, I am.
It's really surreal to come back, especially with my husband, who I met here at Ohio Wesleyan. And to be back and to be recognized publicly for something that sort of germinated here and started here, but that I've been sort of doing in my little hole, my solitary writing hole for such a long time. It's really meaningful, and I didn't really expect it to feel as emotional as it has today, and it's really kind of choked me up at a couple of points. Just thinking, like, first of all, has it really been 15 years? And it's sort of embarrassing hearing people reading your bio, so thank you for not doing that again, because that's like such a cumulative thing of things that is, that takes you 15 years to do, and I push a stroller around Bexley most days. So I'm a parent, and I'm sort of in the trenches, and I'm writing and I'm publishing, and that's a part of what I do too. But it's honestly something that not even some of my neighbors don't know I'm a poet. They think I'm Rhett and Violet's mom, who's home during the day, and they have no idea that I go into a phone booth and turn into a poet when they're napping or in bed at night. And it's sort of like a secret life that I have now, which is nice. And so to be recognized publicly for it is extra sweet. I've been thinking a lot leading up to this weekend about what it means to me to have spent 4 years here. And it's huge. I mean, just personally and professionally. And I was we were talking last night at dinner, and I was saying, my life as it is now wouldn't exist without this school. I mean, the impact has been that great. I wouldn't be married to the person I'm married to, who I met in English classes with 2 of the people in this room. I wouldn't have the children that I have because of that. I wouldn't have started, some of the poems in my first book were poems that I wrote as a student at Ohio Wesleyan that made the cut into my first book. And so even though I wrote poems before I got here, I wasn't really a poet until I got here. And I think this is the place where I really started identifying as a writer, in large thanks to Mr. Argyle Sweatervest. Flanagan. He was a huge mentor to me and a friend, and he pushed me, and he told me the truth about the work when it was good to hear and when it wasn't good to hear. And he told me the truth about carving out a life as a writer and what the competition would be and what solitary work it can be and how disheartening it can be. It sounds dark, but I promise it's going somewhere good. To send work out into what feels like a black abyss over and over and over again and get a lot of no's. And so for all of the list of accomplishments I have in the past 15 years, there is a 10 times longer list of things I didn't get. And the key, I think, that I really learned from someone who hits a heavy bag is that you have to keep hitting, and you have to keep going for it and believing in what you're doing, because you're not doing it for money and you're not doing it for recognition, although it's nice. You're doing it because you don't know how not to do it. And I think that really happened here. I wrote poems in high school, and I kept them in a manila file folder. And I put them in my locker, and I gave out my locker combination. And anybody who wanted to come basically check them out, could come and check them out, and write on them, and leave comments and give me suggestions. And so somewhere, I don't know where, but somewhere I still have this file folder all beat up and chewed around the edges of all of these typed on a typewriter poems, some of them handwritten on notebook paper, with different color ink and different handwriting, like the bubble eyes, this was the 90s.
Yeah.
All over them, like, what is this? Introspective, like, she feels this way, or, just not necessarily even things that were useful, but just that was my way of sharing my work with people who were friends with me, and they actually were interested and would read them. Even though I never got a poem accepted by my high school literary magazine. And so,
early sign of success.
that's right. They didn't understand me. I was just too introspective. But I remember that coming back with a rejection on it. The one time I was brave enough to send work, they wrote on the poems, which seems like an editorial misstep. But it came back and it just said too introspective with a question mark. And I thought, well, it's poetry. So it's not an essay. I'm not really sure what you mean by that. But anyway. So having really no success as a poet in high school, I came here and declared a writing major and just decided to try my hand at it. And right away, my advisor at the time was Lynette Carpenter. And she said, I'm faculty advisor for the Owl and you're going to be on the staff, which was a literary magazine. And I was like, okay, I don't know that I'm really qualified for that, but I did it. And it was a huge experience for me. I met so many kindred spirits and friends doing that. It also gave me the courage to see what was coming in, like what were other people doing? Because until you really get into a workshop, which you don't do in high school, maybe today you do, but in the mid-90s you didn't do that. You don't really know what other people's poems or stories or essays look like. You don't know how you stack up, like how you kind of fall in with what's going on. And it was really useful. And I started publishing in the 2 literary magazines and working on both of them here. And that for me was, again, kind of like validating, like, okay, I can be a part of this crew. And I met a lot of great people that way. I also think it is worth saying that that would not have happened had I gone to Ohio State. I was a pretty shy person. I do not like to speak in front of people. I don't make new friends very easily. I'm kind of to myself. But once I make you into a friend, you will not shake me off. Like, I'm with you. But it doesn't happen very easily. And I would not have felt comfortable in a really large environment seeking out that kind of opportunity. I wouldn't even have thought to do it. And I wouldn't have thought that I had the talent or ability to do it based on my high school experience. So the fact that she reached out to me personally, that only happens at a school with less than 2,000 people where your academic advisor knows you and knows what you do, what you're capable of, but what you might not push yourself to do. And that was huge for me. And along those lines, I also have to say thank you, since I didn't get to say thank you at the award ceremony, to my parents, because my parents are math people. I mean that in like the sweetest way. But my parents have both. My dad worked for Ohio Bell for 30 years. And then went into management. And my mom does payroll for a car dealership. Like we don't have any history of the arts of any kind in my family. Cousins, uncles, aunts, nobody does this. So when I decided I wanted to go to a private school with high tuition and major in, wait for it, creative writing, women's studies, philosophy, and humanities were my majors and my minors. And really, there's not like a moneymaker out of the four. You'd think if you chose 4 courses of study, one of them, you might have some grain of hope that your child wouldn't be living in your basement in 4 years. But they never once pressured me to pick up a double major or a minor in something like business or econ or something that they thought would be more sensible. They never once pushed me towards even teaching. Like, maybe you should do education and go that route because we know that would be somewhere that you would be employable. They just let me do it. And it didn't occur to me until now, being a parent of 2 children, what that means to write a check, a sizable check, to a place where your children are writing poems and not having any idea what's going to come back on that investment, and holding your tongue if maybe you're worried about what might happen to them. And I can only hope that we have the same courage and good sense to save, but also just let them follow what kind of riles them up and appeals to them and what they can see making a life out of instead of just what they can see getting a job in. Because I think those 2 things are different. And I think most of the people I know from Ohio Wesleyan, period, but most of the people I know who are really happy in life post-college are people who are doing things that they love to do and not things that they happen to kind of fall into because it seemed like a sensible choice, which poetry is not. I think what I'd like to do is just read some poems because I'm not really a talker, which maybe I'm faking it well, maybe I'm fooling you, but I wanted to read some poems from my first book, which is worth saying. The cover photo of Lamp of the Body is a street in Delaware. I think it might be Home Street. I didn't take the picture, but my good friend, also from the class of '99, Leslie Loudon, I sent her out. She's a photographer, a wonderful photographer, who's living in California now, and I sent her out with her now husband on the streets of Delaware at night, and I said, what I really want for the cover of my book, because at the time I was naive enough to think that you get to choose the cover of your book, is like, I like how houses look at night when people are watching TV, and the windows are all blue, and it looks kind of like an aquarium, but really it's just the TV light, and there's no other light coming in through the house. So I had her skulking late at night, just like the residential streets of Delaware, taking photos of houses. And this was the one photo that wasn't of a house, but I loved it because it didn't look like a book cover to me. It's sort of a scene, and there are fall leaves, and you can see like the trailing light of a car driving off in one direction, and I just loved it, and the press loved it enough that they just let her design the whole book, cover, spine, and back, and just took it. I think they saw, well, hey, it was free also, so it was really, really top-notch work, but it's also really fitting to me, and it's special to me that this picture happened here. So I'll just go through and read some of them and talk a little bit about some of the stories behind them. I feel like that's what you get at a poetry reading. If you just wanted the poems, you could read them in the book. And the first poem in the book is called Button. If I had to be buried with a poem, it would probably be this poem. If I had to be buried with one of my poems, it would probably be this poem. And it's sort of inspired by a photo of my dad and his siblings standing in front of an old Chevy, and they're wearing these jeans with the cuffs almost up to their knees because they didn't have much, and my grandmother would buy these like really rough like sandpaper jeans, the way my dad describes them, super long because boys grow up and not really out. So you just like fit the waist and then just bank that they're going to keep fitting. And so the cuffs are like past the shins, and you just know that they're going to have to keep wearing the same pants. And they had really horrible buzz cut haircuts that were probably done at home. So this is Button. It's the 50s. You wear your dark Levi's cuffed up 6 inches. You have a cowlick. There is a birthday party you won't attend after a bad haircut. Your mother says, Button, it's not the end of the world. But the weather vane says, Button, the end is near. It says the sky's gone yellow with twisters. Small white stars are invisible all day, but you hear them chatter like teeth. Button, they say, why not play with the others? Look at them, having a fine time. But you wish the devil on the neighbors. You wish them nothing to pin the tail on. You wish the children snatched up in the funnel, paper punch cups still in their hands. The devil won't call you Button. He says if you must be haunted, at least be unashamed. And remember, when I sent that poem, it's the only poem that the Iowa Review has ever taken of mine, and I sent that poem and I got a postcard from the editor saying, I want this poem, but I was alive in the 50s and there weren't white Levi's. And that was the first line. I had changed the color in the poem. And he said there weren't white Levi's. Can you confirm? And I said, well, actually they were dark in the photograph, so I changed it back. Called me on me. Sometimes the editor is right. This poem I wanted to read today because it was inspired by that windy drive of 315 that goes along the river. And I had been reading a lot of James Wright, and still do, and was thinking I really want to write sort of a Delaware, Ohio drive poem. So this is called First Spring.
What is it?
First Spring. The Olentangy is the closest I come to knowing a river. Its choppy water bubbles like spit, breaks around birch limbs, the rounded ruins of a limestone wall. Passing through the scent of chives and lilacs, I see nothing but leaves and dappled cows nosing the slender grasses. I imagine stealing corn from the fields, pulling the pale blonde strands from its pearly buttons. As a child, I broke buckeyes open with rocks and peeled back the shells, rich and brown as polished wood. I imagined their poison meat would taste as I thought marrow would taste, mealy and bitter as human bone. Now this place, with its spare, violent beauty, breaks me open. I resign to spring and its trappings, dark, bloodied scraps of fur in the shoulders of Bean-Aller Road, stones begging to be turned, everywhere the scent of lilacs and no sign of them. I got a lot of poems, I think, out of that drive, that 315 drive. My parents live in Westerville, and so the drive from home to school, whenever I made it for macaroni and cheese or laundry, was always one of the prettiest drives. And actually, I think there's another one in here that's sort of inspired by those back roads drives. What was that one? It's called Singular. Panes of wheat overlap for rusted miles in this country. With a trick distance performs on the eye, suddenly they're one sheet, the color of singed hair, the dog fur texture of harvested grain. Even forest is singular, standing in for plural, a loose bundle of trees, the white elbows of half-lit birches multiplying. A cloak of birds rises and falls in unison. Chimney smoke, the gray spools of hay blanched in the fields, are a pattern repeating, a printed fabric on which the sloping necks of horses become one infinite curve. We crave what resists duplication, the red fox racing alongside the car, the one picket standing in a field, the rest fallen, carted away, the moon sharpening its white edge against our eyes. I said I'd written a couple of the poems from this book in college, which I did. I think 2 of the poems in this book I wrote in advanced creative writing workshop in Mannequin, which my husband was also in, writing plays. And I sort of, took them with me, and I went into grad school at Ohio State after I left Ohio Wesleyan. And then I started writing poems and writing poems and writing poems, and the goal at the end of an MFA is to have a book, basically, to have a thesis that could be published as a book. So I remember sort of toward the end gathering all of my favorite poems and sort of laying them out on the floor and trying to figure out, okay, which ones speak to each other? How are these sort of thematically tied? Which ones do I like, but they just don't really work with the rest of them because they were assignments and they don't feel like part of this body of work, and kind of chucking those. And it really surprised me when I got to the end and sort of shuffling and figuring out the sections and everything, that 2 of the poems that I really wanted to be a part of this book, which was the MFA thesis, were college poems, but I put them in anyway. They weren't poems that I wrote there, but I put them in, and my advisors were like, well, fine. And they made it into the book. So there's a series of poems in here written from the perspective of characters from the Bible. And it wasn't a series when I was in college, I just wrote one of them. And then when I got to grad school, I had a kind of panic attack of, okay, now I'm in workshop. I had a while off. Now I have to show up with these really smart, good writers, and I have to have something to turn in and workshop every week. And I tend to write in spurts, not every day. I'm not a very disciplined writer. I write when the ideas hit me. And so I thought, well, if I really liked that poem, Doubting Thomas, maybe I could come up with a project for myself to keep me going. And so I picked a handful of other characters that I find interesting, sort of bizarre or tense or sad or tragic stories, and wrote sort of from their point of view, kind of taking a new twist on the story. And so that's how that series was born, and there are several of them in the book. But I'll read the one that I wrote across the street. Doubting Thomas. I was tired of the smoke and mirrors, the loaves, the fish, but not nearly enough time. What could I say to him, friend I buried, when he woke and called to me softly from the shadows? Go now. The business of faith bores me. I could take it or leave it. Understand, I touched his wounds because I wanted to feel his warmth on my own hands. If I doubted anything then, it was humanity. Disillusionment is what happens when men dabble in magic. Celebrity is a tree on fire, and of the thousands standing near, none is near enough to lick the flames from their face. Once the embers burning above us were enough, I believe he doubled back from death to breathe home's balmy air, to stand in light among us one last time beneath the high heavens. For this brotherhood I lose a brother. I spit upon the lot we've drawn. So much for twilight spent floating on the river, talking of women we were not to love, and of their skin scrubbed sweet as tangerines. So much for nights we passed in the desert, drunk under the young stars whose names were new. Once my friend agreed, no one could recognize each luminous body across this broadening, eternal cleft. Funny story about that poem, and actually the other one too that I'll read. The 2 that I wrote, I sent, both of the poems that I wrote here, I sent out with my graduate school application packet. So when you apply to MFA programs, they want to see 10 poems. And so obviously I didn't have a lot of work other than what I'd written here, and so I sent these 2 poems. And I got a letter back. I applied to Arizona and Washington. And I got a letter back from David Wagner at the University of Washington, who was a longtime poetry editor of Poetry Northwest and is sort of like legendary, but of course I was so naive I didn't know who he was. And maybe I had no business in applying to that program, but I got a letter back from him and just handwritten on stationery from Poetry Northwest saying, we haven't finalized admissions decisions yet, but I don't think you'll have any trouble, but could I have these 2 poems for Poetry Northwest? And I remember calling Flanagan and saying, how rude. They can't even tell me if I'm in their program and he wants these poems. And he said, Maggie, just give them. And so, true story, the summer before I started graduate school, I had my first real national publication, and it was these 2 poems in Poetry Northwest. And now, of course, I'm like, what? Like, I keep that letter, and it's so important to me. And it just shows how young and stupid I was going out into the world, sort of like, I just read these poems, who wants them? And I was sort of offended that he didn't want to invite me there. He just wanted the work, which really, I got more out of probably him publishing the poems than I would have gotten out of going there.
One of the best editors ever.
That's right. I mean, it's crazy. So this is the other one that they took, and it was published in an earlier form in the Owl. It's called Memoir in Circles. There is a sense of touch transcending the fundamental distinction, here, there. I'm paraphrasing myself here. There is no such thing as an open circle. We curl in, touching foreheads, creating a closed circuit, inadvertently falling asleep. His subsequent dreamlessness, a sky cast over. I am more out than the stars. My view from the plane is that of one traveling alone. Look at the constellations now, noting how the lines have changed over time. We recall them differently than they are. Any point on the circumference of a circle could be the beginning, middle, end. Old English version, this is weird. I don't want my life back. My small thumb, the nail chewed to the quick, is the same as his but scaled down exactly one size. Modern translation, this is fate. Peas still in the pod, a green taste, reminiscent of cool water. Was it even my suitcase I lived out of all week, folding and unfolding? And where do I expect to find myself in these words kept at room temperature? I unlearned the water from him by floating on my back. Vertigo, the sixth sense, we assume, if 5 is still touch. He suspended me on the warm green surface of the lake, his right hand cupping my head, his left at the base of my spine. My heart was light in my chest, keeping me afloat. A column of clouds, a banister without stairs. Think light, a blue freckled bird's egg. Think soft, stepping out into the rain. His grandmother is dead. Send the pale roses with the pretty pink tips, meaning sympathy is inaccurate. A name is not a name. Helena, never Helena. We took our grief to the fireworks and sprawled on the lawn with it, beneath weeping willows of golden ash. It was Independence Day, from now on. Until then I hadn't noticed. There was a point where even the clouds stopped exclaiming, the sky, the limit. Distance that is mathematically sound. My grandfather is dying. Turn your head as you are floating and put your ear to the water. Listen, it sounds like a womb. The body is your own. You either reconcile it or it takes you, frame by frame. Reconsider the night the sun left without us. We stood in the grainy darkness of the clearing, looking out as if the ship we had meant to board had set sail. There is no such thing as an open circle. The airplane windows, in my dream, went blank as sheets of paper. Our books kept falling open to the same scenes, a clear lack of skyscrapers, a column of clouds. Then I woke, from now on, a green taste, reminiscent of cool water. There is a sense of touch. Actually, I remember having that in my master's thesis and having my advisors, who at the time were Kathy Fagan and David Citino and Andrew Hudgens, read through it and say, where did this poem come from? It's so different from everything else you've done. It's so much sort of like wilder and freer and isn't in couplets, and it's not as like sort of pinned in as a lot of the other work you were doing. And I thought, well, it's because I wrote that poem before I got to graduate school. And some of, I mean, it's true. Some of the graduate school you have to like scrub out of your writing. Like you learn a lot, but you also have to learn what to not do You have to learn what voices in the room to pay attention to and what voices to ignore. And I don't know. So I've let my work get a little wilder in the years since then. And I'll read one more from this one. It's the title poem, Lamp of the Body. And it has an epigraph from Matthew. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is sound, your whole body will be full of light. Tonight you're sailing over the tiled roofs in your blue pajamas, over our family streets, redwood, lilacwood, liberty, hummingbird. I can see you by the light of my own body. It fills me to the skin. I can see your cigarette ash is growing inches long and you've forgotten it. You're busy now, navigating the stars, doing each blade of grass with a fingertip. Everywhere I see smoke dissolving, a soft trick of the eye. The ash bends, then drops off. From here I can see pink roses on your blue house slippers. Come down. Do you know my face? That's me waving from the one lit window on a street you don't know. I'm lighting it with my body. And then I think, how are we doing? I should say that if people have questions or want to interrupt me, I don't have to just like hold forth and read poems. So if you have a question about anything, whether a poem or not, holler. I'm okay with hollering. I have a book coming out next spring called The Well Speaks of Its Own Poison, because apparently I like long titles. And I played with other titles for a long time, and then I thought, that's really what this book is about. It's about the thing that is poison sort of trying to tell its own story. And it's largely inspired by fairy tales. Most of them traditional sort of Eastern European fairy tales that we grew up with, but also a lot of Latin American folk tales that I came across as a copywriter, and I had to write catalog copy about books, describing books, and so I came across this book of Latin American folk tales written for children, and I loved the language, and so I started writing these poems, and again, it was a good assignment to give me since I'm not a super regular writer, and I wrote a lot of them. The one thing you should know about this poem, which is called Apologue, there are 8 of these, and they're based on the language and stories in these Latin American fairy tales. I fell in love with them because unlike the Once Upon a Time and Happily Ever After that we get from sort of the classic fairy tales, they have these really interesting sort of opening lines because it's sort of based in the oral tradition, and these really interesting closing lines that are not neat, happy endings that are tying up the story. So the way that these poems all work is that the beginning line is italicized and it is basically just stolen, a classic opening line for a Latin American folktale. And then the closing line is also just completely stolen and italicized to show that. So in this particular poem, the opening line is, "In the land where all is forgotten, where no one remembers anything," and then the story picks up. And then the ending is, "And here a cup got broken. Everyone should now go home." Which I love because it's absurd, and that's part of why it appeals to me, but it's sort of like, well, when especially in fairy tales, they're so gruesome, and they're moral tales, and all of them, like life, should not be sweet and be neatly tied up, and then everyone, the prince came and everything's fine. And so I really it appealed to me, and I think it's sort of a more honest tradition, I'll say that. So this is Apologue 1. "In the land where all is forgotten, where no one remembers anything, birds cut off their beaks to share your sorrow, little torn shoe. Twice of half a moon throbbed, swollen. I don't know what you mourned. This tale was lost among the chestnut trees, where I brought it to you. Little bird of many colors, you are the kind who confuses wondering with wandering. You wander around. Under your braids, a bright light. Little pink apple, life does not taste as good as it should. After all, there is always something better. We choose the best of what is before us, but much is not before us. In the story, a boy chose the horse called Thought over the one called Wind. Thinking swiftly, he rode to you. His sack of apples turned to a sack of rats, his sack of pears to parrots repeating happy, happy, happy. Little gold pin, many things we tell our children are kind but not true. The reverse is also true. You were crying in the chestnut trees. There was no telling the leaves from the leaf-shaped spaces between them. I don't know what you mourned, little winter dear, the birds mute and bleeding all around you. I know you want to forget that last part. And here a cup got broken. Everyone should now go home. If you haven't read the tales, the book that I read is called Tales Our Abuelitas Told, a Hispanic Folktale Collection. It was published in 2006. And I have it in galley copy because I borrowed it from the job that I worked. But it's definitely going to be one that I read with my daughter. I should explain, this is the list of dangers. It's a chapbook, and I feel like a lot of people ask me, what is a chapbook? Because it looks different from this, so what is this? A chapbook is basically kind of like a half book. It's a smaller, sort of comes out of like a pamphlet tradition. It's usually under 30 pages. The poems in the list of dangers, which came out in 2010, are also in the book of mine that's coming out next year, plus another 30 poems. So this is kind of like the teaser half-C version, light of The Well Speaks of Its Own Poison, and then the full-length book, which is actually a little bit bigger than this one, that comes out next year, will have all of these and then some. So I'm gonna read a couple that are just in here, and then a couple that are in the new manuscript that weren't written in time for this one. This is sort of a retake of Little Red Riding Hood. It's called Vanishing Point. When she leaves the path, the forest opens for her like a picture book, minus the story in which she has a deer for a brother and braids him a leash out of flowers. It's no way to live. The girl does not know wickedness when she sees it. What is she doing alone? Gathering nosegays? Using her mother's disregard to hack through the brambles? She measures her distance in lines, a sonnet for every 14 steps down a long hall of yellow leaves. They smell bitter as aspirin. In the nearly invisible rain, they twitch as if tugged by clear wires. What a pity she never arrives. For all she knows, the woman still waits for her wine and cake, her gown gathering dust from the sands of ancient Egypt, from stars burnt out a billion years ago. The girl is lost, not hunted, taken, but not into a hot, dark mouth. Nothing lurks in the fur's blue pins. Swallowed whole by trees, eaten alive in a manner of speaking, she walks toward a point none of us can see. It is blacker there than in the gut. From far off, her life rings like a thrown voice. Let it not be a fable for others. I love that in the real Little Red Riding Hood, she's taking wine and cake to the grandmother. And I don't know how my daughter has possibly picked up on this, but whenever she plays in the play kitchen, sometimes she offers me wine and cake. I mean, maybe that's more about me. Although it would probably be like cookies and stout. She was really basing on my taste. But. I'll read one more from this. It's An Island in the Movies. And this is based on a true story, I'm ashamed to say. I'm just going to leave it at that. It has an epigraph from Becky and Fritz Goldberg, who's one of my favorite poets. And though only children were meant to believe this, I still believe this. An Island in the Movies. I packed my sister's suitcase by putting an idea in her head, that at the other end of the sewer pipe waited the world we had before the child bride disappeared from bed, before razor blades and apples, and boys no older than the ones on our street, dying far away, alone, and piling up on the news. I wanted to believe that I sent her like a scout, and she'd come back for the rest of us. My sister crawled inside, and the darkness sort of ate her. At least that's how I remember it. Like looking at a photograph and knowing someone is just outside the edges. When she stopped calling polo, I ran home and said I hadn't seen her since breakfast, that she was up a tree or on the Albrights' trampoline. I wanted to believe the fable I told myself, that the missing and dead were together somewhere, like an island in the movies, with no phones for telling us they're all right, and no boats or planes to bring them home. That she crawled toward a pinhole of pink gold light and waves like applause. That what I promised was real, a place where everyone wears palm leaves and blue and yellow parrots eat right from your hand. It's a lot less menacing than it is in the poem, as most things are. I convinced my baby sister when we were kids that the Smurfs lived at the end of the sewer pipe in the back of our house, and that if she would simply crawl down the sewer pipe far enough, she would reach Smurfland. And we left her there, and she was probably 5, I don't know, probably about the age of my daughter now, and she ended up getting scared and crawling back out and coming home and ratting us out, and we got in a lot of trouble. And there was a hornet's nest involved in the straw at the mouth of the pipe, and it was not, I spent a lot of time being grounded as a child, which is probably why I wrote poems.
Can I interrupt you
Yeah.
with a question? So we analyzed Maggie Smith, who's Dr. Raggie's granddaughter, brought in your poems in AP Lit last year.
Oh, that's right, I met her at, yes, that's
Yeah.
right.
So we analyzed, and I forget, they were about the house and the cat. It's from the Life of the Body, and we were sort of analyzing, did you have a terrible traumatic childhood, or where did this come from, and like was your father abused, and we a lot of fascinating analysis. So I'm just curious in terms of, that was obviously very autobiographical, and
Yeah.
the body true, was it more based on photographs and imagined events?
No, I had a really happy childhood, and true story. I was once, I will give the nice version of this. I was once publicly heckled by my mother at a poetry reading, it was many years ago, by saying, and she was saying, that never happened. You had a great childhood. And I was like, I know, it's just a poem. Don't get so up in hackles about it. But no, I mean, there's really anything autobiographical in Lamp of the Body that is painful is about my grandmother, who we lost to a combination of late-stage Alzheimer's and late-stage cancer combined when I was in grad school. So a lot of these poems, including Lamp of the Body, are about sort of seeing her get sick. But anything other than that, it's just imaginative. But it is interesting. I mean, when you write a poem especially if you leaf poems that are not autobiographical but still have that same kind of voice, and it feels intimate with poems about things that really happened, you certainly run the risk of people just assuming that everything in the book happened to you as is. My life would be very dark if any of my books were my life, which is why they're my books and not my.
Do you know were you ever dropped on your head?
No, but I did shock myself quite badly with a lightning strike at one point in my adult life. So yes, but I was writing poems before then, so I think it's safe to say that it was already in there.
No, I just, my family would say that why I turned out differently than everyone else.
You took a lot of hits.
Didn't end up in jail. Was that I was kneeling on the kitchen counter in the apartment to close a window to go with lightning, and my dad and uncle were drinking the table and said, crawl up there and close that window.
What happened to me?
To close the window, the wire clothesline that came all the way down from an iron pipe to right over the door lit up.
Yeah.
That was it. I didn't know what happened. It blew me right across the room.
Mine
And
wasn't
the
quite
bolt
that bad.
went
But yeah.
through, from that window, through the hallway, we lived in the railroad part, hallway, and out the front window where my sister saw it. Wow. And my dad always said afterwards,
That's
Happened
why.
in the sad birthday.
I have to say that's kind of close. So I was touching a metal door frame, and lightning hit the metal door frame.
Oh, there you go.
Went in one side and down out the other, and it was very quick, and I just kind of yelled. And
Well,
was
that's-
loosey-goosey. I didn't get the full juice.
They haven't.
Maybe I'd be like the National Book Award winner. I really just let it happen. But,
They haven't studied that.
hey,
Lightning strikes.
lightning strikes. I want to read two poems from the new book that are in this chapbook. One of the themes in fairy tales often is transformation, and it's often like human to animal, animal to a different animal. There's sort of that shape-shifting thing that happens, and I was thinking about it. I started writing these poems before having kids, and then after I had my daughter, I thought, gosh, I've been sort of writing poems about her. I've been writing poems about being the mother of a daughter in these fairy tale poems without actually having one, and now that I have one, it's becoming even more sort of important to me. And thinking about that sort of shape-shifting in terms of how quickly, especially small children, grow and change. And some days, I swear, I'll get my son out of his crib in the morning and he looks facially different to me from the day before. Like they're just changing at such a rapid rate. Violet, our oldest, used to sing to the birds at like 5 o'clock in the morning in her crib. So you'd hear her in there going, peep, peep, like making bird sounds before she was even supposed to be awake. And so I wrote this poem. It's called Shapeshifter. Half me, you're half haunted. Your heart is destined to skip like a scratched record. But lucky you, you weren't made of the past, an alchemy that comes out all rusted. You weren't hauled up like a car from the lake. No, you're new. As soon as I memorize your face, you change it. Shapeshifter, it's a dream chase. The more I pursue you, the faster you run. You answer my wren with a hawk, my doe with a fox. The more you change, the harder it is to go back. Waking at dawn, the light outside still limey, just barely yellow with sunrise. I hear the first few birds starting up, one, then another, then you chiming in, peep, peep, peep. Half me, I'm half afraid to see you this morning, wondering who or what I will find in your bed. And I have to read this one because I owe this entire poem really to my daughter. I don't know if it was a dream or just something she thought up because kids think of crazy things, but she said to me once, there were lights in the lemon trees so you could see the lemons, and a whistle so you could call your friends. And of course I was like, and I wrote it down because I write down almost everything she says because I feel like you have to kind of, I mean, she's not paying rent. So, but I will say when I wrote the poem and the poem got published and I actually got a check, I think it was like $75 for the poem, which is sort of rare, frankly, and I put it in her college fund because I feel like if I'm going to steal from her, I should at least pay her for it. And really that's my money anyway, the college fund is my money. Yeah. But when it came, the magazine came in the mail, print magazine, and I got it and we were sitting at the table and I was like, I'm going to read her this poem and she's going to be like, so moved and like excited that she's in print. And I read it to her and she looked at me, she goes, I didn't say all that. And I thought, well, do you really think I'm just gonna type, like you're just gonna dictate to me and I'm gonna send it off? So this is Lights, Lemons. There were lights in the lemon trees so you could see the lemons. There were lights in the lemon trees and a whistle for calling out. There was a girl among the lit lemons who blew a whistle and waited for someone, anyone, to find her. There were lights and lemon trees and a whistle and a girl and no one came when she called. I wonder if the girl is a version of you. I wonder what whistle I could give you, what pitch I could listen for, and all those leaves, all that lit fruit, so I could come and lift you down into the dark grass. She was very incensed that I appropriated her words. And I think I might just finish with, I thought it might be kind of interesting to read something that is like wholly new, if I can find it, that sort of exists in print in a magazine but doesn't exist in book form. I've been working on, I was telling Marty Hipsky last night that I've been working on all these poems about my kids because that's what I do. So my life now really is shuttling children around, ferrying them, and they don't have activities, they're small, I am their activity. But, you know, we're at the grocery store, at the post office, we're walking to the library for story time and rhyme time and music class and yada yada. And we have conversations. Rhett, not so much, he's kind of like Momo for lawnmower, but Violet really wants to ask big questions now. She's like, she does not let you off the hook either. She wants answers. And it really has begun to hit me that so much of being a parent is being a sort of a tour guide, and that we're really their first teachers, and that there's a lot of sort of pressure to present the world in a way that is favorable but also honest, and point out to them all the things that they should and can be thinking about and doing, and it's a lot to pour into a 5-year-old. I'm probably rushing. And she's been asking a lot of questions. So one of the questions she asked the other day was, where are all the deer that used to be out by the airport before they did all of that construction? And I told her, well, I gave her this long lecture about how this all used to be wilderness, and then people came and put roads and the CVS and all this stuff. And Jason's like, Maggie, she's like 2.5. Why are you giving her a land use management lecture? But I just feel like I don't know how to talk to her any other way than to talk to her like she's a person. And I think I'm age appropriate and respectful, but I'm not going to so the deer went away to live someplace new with their new family. That's not, I'm a poet, that's not who I am. So this is Deerfield. My daughter wants to know where the deer are. We used to see them across the street from the airport's long-term parking lots before backhoes tore down the trees and piled them in the grass. At the intersection of Broad and James, I tell her all of this was forest before she was born, and it was full of deer. But they had to leave when people came and cleared the land for buildings, that gas station, that drugstore, and roads like the one we're on now. Even where our house stands once was wilderness. She says it makes her sad. The few bare trees left are leafed with blackbirds, wings trembling a little in the wind. The sky is a single sheet of corrugated cloud, rippled but seamless, as if to prove it was not manufactured. She doesn't ask what they are building by the airport and what we called Deerfield. It doesn't matter. I have changed her. I have given her the first in a long list of disappointments, clearing away a perfect wild space in her to make room for it. At least if you're gonna have a parenting failure, you should get a poem out of it. She also has been asking a lot of questions that I've been writing down, and I started a series of poems. And the epigraph of all of them is the question and her age when she asked it. This poem is Big Bang. And the question is, how did the world get here? Violet, age 4. On the way to the post office, she asked me this while I'm driving. I didn't answer her with all of this, I assure you. An explosion broke space like a black plate into pieces, and the pieces became stars and planets, and one of those pieces is the world. No, it won't happen again this afternoon. Not like a tornado with a siren to usher us underground. There is no space explosion drill. The famous astrophysicist says the universe wants to kill us. It is expanding as I drive to the closest and worst post office in town. The one with the longest line, the most incompetent clerks, the postage machine that is always out of order. And in 3 billion years, our galaxy will collide with another. The letter I stamp forever flies to someone who won't be alive next century. The Big Bang is still happening, but slowly. So slowly we don't feel the pieces of not world pulling apart from the world. I think I just told you the part about the plate. You'll learn later. I think I'll stop there. We're pretty close. Are there any questions or anything? I want to thank you guys so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. Thanks.
It was beautiful.